The Will is the 5th episode of the 4th season of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is directed by Will Mackenzie, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. It's a really good episode. Interestingly, well, it's not that interesting, but with rewatching Everybody Loves Raymond, there are some episodes that I remember really well from when I used to watch the show about 10 years ago. There are many episodes because of my rubbish memory that I just can't remember, and it's like watching them for the first time. But this one, I actually remembered quite vividly, and even with that in mind, I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and it doesn't surprise me that I remembered it well, because it's a great episode. It starts off with Ray telling a pretzel and foul ball story, not a bad way to start things off, and then following on nicely from his almost near-death experience, Debra announces that they have a meeting with an attorney. I fluffed up my words there, but I've done it 4 times in a row, so I'm not stopping and starting again. They're having a meeting with the attorney to discuss their will so that they can sort things out in case something happens to them. And the attorney comes over. It's a delightful scene, and they get to the part where they have to say who they'd want the children to go to if anything were to happen to them. Ray instinctively says his parents. Debra points out that just because it's convenient, it doesn't mean it's the right thing. And the attorney goes before they have a chance to come to an agreement. I like the fact that there was no big argument about this, and Ray did kind of realise that actually they're probably not the best, and Debra accepted that her parents probably aren't the best choice. So they actually decide on Bernie and Linda. And before they get a chance to talk to Bernie and Linda about this, Marie comes over and finds out about this. And understandably, she's very upset. And then Robert finds out. And he's upset. And I have to say, I'm surprised Robert wasn't a choice. I guess they went with Bernie and Linda because they're married. They've now got a child. They have a new baby. And Robert is not married and doesn't have children. But as Robert pointed out, he's a police officer. He's first aid trained. He'll have experience with difficult situations. And I'm honestly surprised that he wasn't the first choice, to be fair. So I can understand why Robert would be upset. Marie, I would expect her to be upset, but I think it's a little more fair that they'd want the children to go to, I guess, a younger couple who are going to live, in theory, live longer than Marie and Frank will. And then Bernie and Linda come over, they're having dinner, they're looking at the new baby, and then Robert comes over. And then the next thing we know, in quite a scary scene, all we hear is Marie's voice from the living room, and she's leaning over the baby, looking at the baby, and it's genuinely quite a terrifying moment. And Marie and Robert start to say kind of passive comments. And then Robert starts to interrogate Bernie and Linda, asking questions about Cocoa Puffs. And I have to say, the question about the 7-year-old in the radio, I really liked. It was very clever. I didn't pick up on it because he asked them what would they do if they were in a car and this 7-year-old child was turning the radio up and up and up. And they had some, what I would consider to be good suggestions. And then Robert pointed out a 7-year-old shouldn't be in the front of the car where they can access the radio, which I didn't pick up on. And honestly, pretty clever. And then with Robert and Marie out of the house, they managed to ask Bernie and Linda if they will take the children if something happens to Debra and Ray. And I think this was predictable, but maybe I could just remember it from when I watched it before. They said no. And I really respect that, actually, because I would also say no. As somebody who is childless, who almost definitely doesn't want children, I don't want to then take on the responsibility of somebody else's child because I can't communicate with children. I'm not good at talking with children. It's just not for me. And if somebody asked me to be the guardian of their children in the event of a fatality, I would say no, because I don't think I could give that child the best care. And that's not necessarily why Linda and Bernie said no, but they had their reasons, and I really respect that, because I imagine a lot of people would just be like, yeah, sure, I'll do that, thinking nothing's ever going to happen. And obviously in most cases, thankfully, nothing does happen. But the reason these things exist is because they do unfortunately happen to some people. And I like the fact that they didn't say yes thinking it would never happen, and then one day it could happen. So actually, I have a lot of admiration for their honesty there. And Debra and Ray are back to square one, trying to find somebody. And I know Marie wouldn't, out of spite, say, no, I don't want them anymore. As soon as they would say to her, you can take the children, I know for a fact she'd be overjoyed. But I feel like that's a conversation where Marie could really take the high ground because she's not their first choice. Had Marie not found out they were going to ask Bernie and Linda first, it wouldn't have been an issue. So I guess the moral there is don't tell your second or third or fourth choice that they're not the first choice for guardianship, just in case your first choice doesn't want to do it. But I think it's also a really brilliant episode because it could hopefully make anybody who is a parent who hasn't yet made formal arrangements for such a situation to then go and do that. So I think it's really, really important. I say that not as a parent to a child, but this is actually something I've thought about with my cat. I don't actually know, genuinely don't know who my cat would go to if anything happened to me, and that's something I genuinely do worry about. That worry would probably, I imagine, would be significantly greater if she were a human child. So if the episode helps anybody to realise that actually they should probably do something similar, I think that's a pretty amazing thing. Nobody wants to think about that kind of worst case scenario. But it's important, and the episode does a really good job of highlighting that while being funny, entertaining, engaging. Really solid episode. Doesn't surprise me that I remembered it really well from back in the day. Definitely one that I enjoyed, and I think a really important episode as well.